the migration motive would become more pronounced in the history of Islam in the Middle East, because as you heard from the previous presentation, that the Muslims developed the idea of the Hajj. And the Prophet's Hajj, towards the end of the presentation you heard, the Prophet performed his pilgrimage. And then, of course, when he died, the Muslim migrated to Abyssinia, but the most important migration, and the Islamic calendar is based on that migration, was the migration from Mecca to Medina. Yathrib. The name of that place was called Yathrib, but they changed it to Madinatul Munawwar, the city of the Prophet. Now, here I took off from where my colleagues have ended, and will now show you how the migration motive is reinforced by another interesting development about these three Abrahamic religions, especially in the Middle East, and these motives and what I call the fascination of the Abrahamics with stones. It's another thing we don't think about, that the Abrahamic religions are fascinated with stones. If you look at Judaism, where did Abraham had the encounter with the angel when he wanted to sacrifice his son in the mountain? Stones. Where did Moses get his revelation? Mount Sinai. Stones. Where did Jesus get the Sermon on the Mount? Where did he get the Transfiguration, if you're a Christian? Mount of Olives, right? Where did Prophet Muhammad get his revelation? Mount Hira. So you can see the fascination with stones. But it doesn't stop with that. Going side by side with the migration motif is this fascination with stones at the Battle of Jericho. If you read the Old Testament for the Jews and the Christians, what did Joshua tell the Jewish men? Each one should pick up a stone to carry with them. And for the Christians, what did Jesus say to Peter? You are my stones. When the Prophet Muhammad overcome the Meccans and they had the march on Mecca, where did they go? They abolished all the idols, but they kept the Kaaba, stone. That's why Omar ibn Khattab, the second caliph, when he went to the Kaaba, he knocked on the Kaaba and said, if I didn't see Muhammad kiss you, I wouldn't. You are just stone. Now you see, the migration motive and the fascination with stones, which becomes more evident for Jews, they have what? The Wailing Wall. Fascination with stones. And for the Muslims, when they go for pilgrimage, what do they do in Jamra? Stones. You see it on TV? So you see the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims, they're all fascination with stones. Dome of the Rock, you know. You can think yourself, you can think more. I'm sure your students, once you begin to talk about with this, your students, they will come out with things. You send them hurrying into the Bible and the Torah and the Quran, looking for this fascination with stones. Now, the migration motive is very much part of Middle Eastern religion. That's why I challenge people like Renan to say, oh, they are just the religion of desert. No, there are higher things. The migration motive is both metaphysical and physical. Fascination with stones. Because I remember I gave a lecture talking to some Muslims about this fascination with stones. One of the Muslim guys wrote me a note and said, This is for my wife. I read it, he said, but some other people are also fascinated with stones. Women like diamonds. So the fascination with stones and the migration motive in terms of religion in the Middle East is very obvious now. And even Americans who have been very much influenced by the Abrahamics are equally fascinated with stones. They have the Washington Monument, Jefferson, Lincoln, and they have Mount Rushmore. So you can see that even Americans who are secular, they're also fascinated with stones. You see. So for some reason, there is this problem with regard to the origin of religion. So when you talk about Islam in the Middle East, therefore, you must bear that in mind. Now, the major contribution of Islam in the Middle East is to be understood in terms of the anthropology of Islam, the history of Islam, and the psychology of Islam. Islam changed the Arab consciousness from a tribal consciousness to a more global, universal consciousness. In the sense that you saw that very clearly in the previous presentation, that if you talk about Islam in the Middle East, what Islam did was Islam provided a book to the Arabs, to the point that the Arabs now begin to say, we also have our book. And they see themselves as part of the peoples of the books. Because they describe the Jews and the Christians as what? People of the book. So the coming of Islam in the Middle East bring the Arabs into that circle of civilization builders, so that they now become people of the book. They have their books. They have now developed literacy, and they are now part of that great discourse between civilizations. Islam in the Middle East also created unity among the Arabs, to the point that the Asabiya you are hearing created a sense of unity, because historically the Arabs were divided between the northern Arabs and the southern Arabs. Now, one thing that Islam has done in the Middle East is that it created an Arab consciousness, but that consciousness was not ethnic consciousness that is linked to the here and now. It was a consciousness built on a belief in the hereafter, that your life in this world is temporary. So the Muslims in the Middle East became a people who were united increasingly across ethnic clan lines, to the point that the Arabs were not only integrated across ethnic and clan lines, to the point that they now have a new identity called Muslim identity, but the other groups, some of whom were more advanced than the Arabs, like the Persians, who had a longer civilization. You read about the Persians in the Bible. In the Torah, you have the Greeks and the Romans. The Muslims, when they came to the area, were able not only to come up with a book, that is the Quran, that addressed both physical and metaphysical issues, but Islam in the Middle East benefited also from the previous civilizations, because there is definitely a Christian and a Jewish and a paganic background to Islam. And one thing that Islam has been able to do is that Islam was able to benefit from the legacies of the previous civilizations. And many of the groups that were before the Islamic presence were brought into the Islamic tradition. That's one of the reasons why, if you look at the Islamic narrative with regard to Islam in the Middle East, you can see that the Prophet had around him people from other civilizations and other cultures who were not Arabs, but they became part of that emerging Muslim community. You have Salman al-Farsi, the Persian guy. Like, you have Suhaib, the Roman guy. And then you have Bilal ibn Rabah, who was the Muazzin. So you can see that Islam in the Middle East, therefore, became a new religion in the eyes of the non-Muslims For the Muslims, you can hear in the narrative that there were two tendencies with regard to how this new movement was perceived in the Middle East. It was perceived as, by some Muslims, as a continuation of the previous revelations going back to Adam. And this is one of the reasons why the Muslims look at the Christian and Jewish narrative differently with respect to who is a prophet and who is not a prophet. Suddenly, when Jews and Christians hear the Muslims say Adam was a prophet, they will disagree because Adam, to them, was not a prophet. He was the first parent of humankind. But for Muslims, he was not only the first parent, but also the first prophet, because they sinned at the urging of Satan, Iblis, but then they reconciled with God and God forgave them. And Adam, according to Muslims, became the first prophet. And the Prophet Muhammad would be the last of the 124,000 prophets. You had Hamza telling you that that's one opinion, that's from Abu Dawood, but there are others who would say the number approximates 200,000. So when you talk about Islam in the Middle East, therefore, and you dealt with the Christian and the Jewish background to Islam in the Middle East, you have to recognize the fact that as far as the Muslims are concerned, the Muslims saw themselves as continuation. Because some Muslim scholars and some of the writers would say that there were a group of Arabians who were not pagans in the way we described them earlier, people who have this remote idea of a God, but they believe, they're so superstitious, and they believe in this polytheism, Lat, Ulat, Uzza, Malat, all those. No, you have now some Muslims who see Islam as a movement that was beginning to transform the Middle East, because Islam was now emerging in the Middle East not only as an improvement on Arabian culture, but also as a movement that was designed as a system-challenging movement to the dominant empires of the time, such as the Roman, who control the areas that would eventually fall into the hands of the Muslims, and the Persians, who were then governed by a dynasty called the Sasanian dynasty.